Good morning, everyone. My name is Joey Mack. Welcome to the State of Diversity in Chicago's VC Industry. This is our third annual VC Diversity Survey data release event, and I just want to say thanks to all of you for joining. I also want to thank our foundational sponsors, CDW and Origin Ventures, as well as all of our other financial supporters and our in-kind partners whose generous support makes our work possible. A little bit about Chicago Blend. Our mission is to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Chicago's venture capital and startup community. We were founded in 2018 by a group of local venture capitalists who were really alarmed at the lack of representation of women and people of color in our local VC and startup community. That's how Chicago Blend got started. We have three areas of work that we focus on. The first is around data. So each year we measure the demographic blend of our VC and startup community. Our second area of work is really around capacity building and providing resources and education to venture capital firms and to the startups that they back. And then our third area of focus is around community. We understand that venture capital is a very network-driven industry, and our goal is to increase network connectivity between aspiring investors, underrepresented founders, and the community of VCs that we work with day in, day out. I wanted to start just by talking about why underrepresentation is a problem. And hopefully I don't need to make too hard of a sell to all of you, but for Chicago Blend, underrepresentation of women, people of color, and other minorities in venture capital is a problem on two fronts. First, it's a societal problem because equity matters. Chicago's VC and startup community should reflect the incredible diversity of our overall population. That is a deeply held belief that we have at Chicago Blend, and it certainly guides all of the work that we do. But the second problem is really an economic one. Underrepresentation comes with real economic costs because if only a limited part of our population is participating in our tech economy, then we are limiting the number of ideas, the number of perspectives, and the number of talented individuals who are contributing to it. In other words, underrepresentation holds us back from achieving our full potential as a city. By embracing and championing diversity in this sector, we maximize the opportunity to continue building and launching even more great companies. And I think that's something that all of us on this webinar can agree we should be doing for Chicago. This is the third time that we've gathered this racial, ethnic, and gender demographics for Chicago's VC workforce. And as the old saying goes, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Chicago Blend, we believe in the power of data to bring about systems level change. And that starts by holding ourselves and our tech community accountable. Releasing data like what we're going to be talking about today is one way that we are attempting to do that. I do want to just take a moment because I know we'll probably get some questions about this. The survey that we'll be talking about today is really focused on racial, ethnic, and gender demographics because that's where we can find the most data. But certainly at Chicago Blend, we understand that diversity, there are several dimensions to it, whether you're talking about veteran status, disability status, LGBTQ+ identification. Those are things that matter as well. As we continue to do this work and to gather this data and improve our data collection methods over time, we will certainly work on layering in those types of insights into our analysis in the future. So a little bit about how today is going to work. I'm going to spend the next few minutes going through the key findings. I see a couple people raising their hands already. We will have time to answer questions at the end of this webinar. So as we're going through the findings, if you have any questions, please do put that into the chat, or I'm sorry, the Q&A. We'll get to as many of those as possible. So we're going to go through the key findings. Again, use the Q&A function to ask questions, and that will be followed by a panel discussion with 3 of our advisory board members, and that'll be moderated by Nancy Lay, who leads corporate strategy and innovation for CDW, one of our major financial supporters. As we go into the data, I did want to just also take a moment to thank our incredible volunteers who you see listed here. This data collection effort is a huge lift, and we couldn't do it without all of our incredible volunteers and data analysts and interns who are contributing their time and effort to helping us pull this together. Some of them are students, some of them are working professionals. All of them have dedicated so much time and effort. So again, to all of you listed here, thank you for your support. So I'll start by just talking about the overall contours of the survey, and then we'll dig right into the findings. The data that we're presenting today was collected in late summer and early fall of last year. And in this data collection effort, we identified 771 employees at 114 firms here in the Chicago area. And when we say firms, what we mean is a firm has a Chicago office or a Chicago presence that has made at least one venture investment in the previous year. Firms can include venture capital firms with 5 million in AUM, family offices, angel investment networks, and a handful of other investors who also do venture deals. A little bit about our methodology. Fund size and first-time fund determination is sourced from PitchBook, CB Insights, Crunchbase, news articles that we find online, as well as other publicly available data. Employee information is obtained from both PitchBook and from the firm's individual websites, and firms were given an opportunity to either confirm or correct their data via email. For seniority, we define executive level as a person with a partner, general partner, MD, or C-suite title. We know that not all titles conform to one of those 4 categories, and in those instances, we make a judgment call, but that's generally what we mean when we are talking about executives. And when we talk about other company types, that can include fundless sponsors, corporates, banks, firms operating as the trading arm of a trading group, hedge fund, or other financial services company. Something new this year that we added was non-binary or other as an option under the gender field, but we did not identify anyone among these 771 employees that were surveyed. We didn't identify anyone in this year's data set or 2021's data set who identifies as such. So as I'm going through some of the charts and tables, if you don't see non-binary or other, that's the only reason why. Certainly, if you are aware of someone who identifies as such, who's working in the local venture community, please let us know. We'd be glad to update our data accordingly. Excuse me. So while we're on that topic, gender seems to be a good place to start. So let's dive right into the findings. When we look at representation within our venture community by gender, this is where things currently stand, at least in 2021, which is the latest information that we have. Chicago's VC workforce is just under 34% women, and men make up just over 66% of the overall workforce. We'll dive a little bit deeper into these gender numbers. This was actually an increase in the number of women working in venture between 2020 and 2021. You'll see on the left side of this chart, it represents a roughly 4% increase year over year. This is also the second year in a row when we saw an increase in the number of women working in VC. Again, we've done this 3 years now. Although this is a encouraging sign, women at Chicago area VCs still make up a smaller share when compared to the country as a whole, where we see that women make up about 45% of the overall VC workforce. We got those national numbers from the National Venture Capital Association and their VC Human Capital Survey, which is the most comprehensive and complete national data that we could find. Again, sticking on representation by gender, we also look at it at representation both at all of the 114 funds that we surveyed, as well as among first-time funds. We identified 18 first-time funds in our 2021 survey data set. When we're looking at first-time funds only, we find that women make up almost 43% of all first-time fund employees. That's actually an increase from 2020, where they made up about 39% of all first-time fund employees. So year over year, that's a 8.5% year-over-year increase. Again, the total number of women in all venture capital in Chicago is just over 4%, or I'm sorry, the increase was just over 4% year over year in 2021. So what this tells us is that a first-time funds is helping to accelerate the share of women who are working in our local venture community. Let's switch over to race for a moment. This is what representation by race among all of the VC firms in Chicago look like. You'll see here 78% of the VC workforce is white, 10% is Asian, 6% is Black or African American, 4% is Hispanic or Latino, and then the remaining 2% and some change is either other non-white or other unknown. I do want to take a moment, just because I know we might get some questions about this. The use of these race categories here, I realize that when I say Latino, that is not gender neutral. We adopted the race and ethnicity categories established by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. We use those standards for the purposes of being able to compare our data apples to apples with national data. So although some of you tuning in today may define race and ethnicity categories differently, just know that we are adhering to a nationally set standard for this data set. I should also mention that when we use Asian as a race ethnicity category, that does include people of South Asian and Indian descent as well. So this is the same data with some 2020 data kind of side by side. You'll see here that white professionals continue to make up the vast majority of Chicago's VC workforce. Again, it's about 78% according to our 2021 data. You'll also see there have been some gains among Hispanic and Latinos, Black and African Americans, as well as Asian professionals who are working in local venture. I realize that with the big majority of white professionals working in venture, this graph may not be as meaningful. So for the purposes of additional analysis, on the next slide, you're going to see the same data, except we stripped out the non-white category so we could zoom in a little bit on some of the professionals who are not white. And here you'll see that Hispanic and Latino professionals made up about 4.28% of the total VC workforce in 2021. That represents the greatest year-over-year percent increase at about 80% of any other racial or ethnic group. Black or African American professionals made up just over 6% of the total VC workforce in 2021. That represents the second highest year-over-year percent increase at about 12%. And then Asian professionals round out the number 3 spot in terms of year-over-year percent increases. They constitute about 10% of the total VC workforce here in Chicago. So that's a roughly 10% year-over-year increase. You'll see there was this dip year-over-year. It's 35% for other non-white, but again, because these numbers are relatively small compared to the rest of the sample, even just 1 or 2 people leaving or switching roles can skew that data. Again, I would just remind you, if you do have questions or something that you want to share, please put that in the Q&A. After these findings, we'll try to address as many of those questions through the Q&A function, and then we'll also have some time at the end of this webinar for the panelists and for me to answer any questions about this data that you might have. Here is the exact same slide, except we've layered in some national data. So I think it's helpful to just understand what representation looks like here in Chicago, but also against the backdrop of the rest of the industry nationally as well. So here in the red numbers that are on this chart, again, we pulled this data directly from the NVCA VC Human Capital Survey. So you'll see that for Hispanic and Latino professionals, those who are working in Chicago's venture community are actually lagging behind national rates by a bit. Nationally, about 7% of VC professionals are Hispanic or Latino. Again, here in Chicago, that's closer to 4%. Asian professionals, we're seeing a similar pattern. Nationally, about 18% of VC professionals are Asian, although here in Chicago, that number is closer to 10%. Something that is interesting, though, is that Black and African-American professionals here in Chicago seem to be outpacing national rates, where we see about 4% of the total national VC workforce identifying as Black or African-American. Here in Chicago, it's 6%. That being said, even though these are some encouraging numbers, we're seeing some great year-over-year percent changes, it's still worth noting that in total, all non-white professionals combined still make up only 22% of our local VC workforce. Only 1 in about 5 people locally who are working in this industry is a person of color. It's also important to just understand these numbers against the backdrop of our overall population demographics here in the city. According to the US Census Bureau, the city of Chicago is about 33% white, 29%, 30% Black or African-American, and 29% Hispanic or Latino, with Asians making up about 6.5% of our local population. So when you roughly think about our city as being 1/3 white, 1/3 Black, 1/3 Latino, the disparities overall within this industry are even more pronounced. Similar to what we do for gender, we also look at representation by race and ethnicity, both at all funds as well as at first-time funds. On the next slide, it's a little more detailed. So this is the same graphic that I had on the previous slide, just a little bit smaller. But here are some notable trends, observations that we thought were worth sharing with you today. We see here that Hispanic and Latino professionals make up about 7, almost 8% of first-time fund employees. That's actually up from about 2.5% in 2020. So year-over-year percentage, that's a 213% year-over-year increase. Black and African-American professionals made up almost 20% of all first-time fund employees. That's up from about 12.5% in 2020. So that represents a 56.5% year-over-year increase. With Asian professionals, we saw a slight downward trend. They made up just under 6% of first-time fund employees here in Chicago. Again, that's down slightly from just 6.33% in 2020, or a 6% year-over-year decrease. But again, because those numbers are so close and the relative numbers are pretty small, we interpret that as remaining relatively flat. And when we look at first-time funds and representation of white professionals, they make up about 65% of all first-time fund employees in Chicago. That is down from 2020, where they made up about 78.5%. That equates to about a 17% year-over-year decrease. It's worth looking at first-time fund as well as intersectionality data. I won't go through all of these line by line. If you're interested in going through some of these sheets and doing some of your own analysis, we certainly welcome that. You can find all of this information on our website at chicagoblend.org/data. But a couple things that I did want to highlight for you. Again, we saw big increases year over year of Hispanics, Latinos working in venture capital in general. And you'll see here that a lot of that is attributed to first-time funds. If you're looking kind of in that second set of rows, we saw a 213% year-over-year increase of Hispanic and Latinos at first-time funds. And when just looking at Hispanic women or Latinas, that's a 421% year-over-year increase. We also saw some notable increases in the number of Black African-American professionals working at first-time funds. We're comparing it between men and women. That's pretty evenly distributed at about 48.5% year-over-year increase for both Black men and Black women. And again, similar to the last chart, but you can just see it by gender here. For Asian professionals, for white professionals, we are seeing slight decreases there, with the exception of Asian men. Looks like there was a slight increase from the previous year of Asian men working at first-time funds. Something else that we've been tracking is promotions. So here you'll see that in 2021, we were able to identify 502 professionals that had been promoted from the previous year's analysis. Again, our total sample size is 771, so 502 of those 771 total employees got a promotion in 2021. In terms of the distribution, you'll see that women, about 40% of those promotions went to women, about 60% of the promotions went to men. This is actually pretty, we observed a similar trend, similar levels the year before in 2020. I think about 42% of promotions went to women in the previous year. So these numbers did remain relatively flat. But again, you have to take this in the context that there are just many more men who are working in VC. We see kind of a similar thing in terms of promotions by race and ethnicity. Here, 78% of promotions went to professionals who are white. About 12% went to professionals who are Asian, and then less than 10% of all promotions that were handed out last year went to folks who identify as Black or African American, or those who are Hispanic or Latino. Again, these numbers are somewhat staggering, but you have to take this in the context that the number of Black and Hispanic professionals who are working in VC is just smaller, so it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that that there are just more raw promotions. The number of raw promotions that went to professionals went to those who are white. Something else that we look at is executive roles and seniority. Just as a reminder from an earlier slide, when we talk about seniority, when we say executive level, we are referring to a person who is a partner, general partner, MD, or someone who has a C-suite title. Again, we know that there are lots of different variations on titles. We try to make the best judgment call that we can and ask firms to confirm that information. But again, I won't go through this line by line, but what we are seeing in 2021 is that more women did move into executive roles. If you see in the middle toward the top there, in 2020, about 17% of executives were women among Chicago's VC workforce. That number jumped up to a little under 21% in 2021. So that's about a 22% year over year increase. We also saw the number of Hispanic and Latino professionals. They made the greatest gains of any other racial or ethnic group, especially Hispanic women and Latinas. Again, that's not that surprising given some of the previous slides where we saw those numbers increase. And then finally, we do look at racial and ethnic as well as gender diversity by fund size. We didn't see any consistent trends year over year between fund sizes, but we collect that information nonetheless, so I thought I'd share it here. We did see that the biggest year over year change was among Hispanics and Latino professionals working at firms at the $15 to $100 million fund size. Second biggest year over year change was among Black and African American professionals. And then the third biggest year over year change was among Asian professionals working at firms with $100 million or more under management. I know that I went through that quickly. Again, if you want some more to dig in the data some more, please visit our website, chicagoblend.org. But some key takeaways, we've made some progress, some encouraging progress in the share of women and people of color that are represented in our local VC community, but that progress remains slow. The greatest percent increases year over year have been among Hispanic and Latino professionals, especially among Hispanic women and Latinas. But we still lag behind national rates in terms of the representation of women, Hispanic and Latinos, and Asian professionals in particular. And again, the disparities are even more pronounced when you consider that Chicago is just more racially and ethnically diverse than the rest of the country. I hope this information was helpful. Again, we provide this really as a benchmark, and we'll continue to do this each year so that we can measure trends and progress and gains and everything else in between. But I'd like to now invite our panelists to come online and really get their thoughts about this data. Again, if you're interested in learning more, definitely check out our website. But for right now, we are going to jump into the panel portion to get our panelists' view on the data and also get their thoughts on what to expect in 2022. Again, if you have questions, please do use the Q&A function. We'll get to as many of them as possible. But for now, I'm delighted to pass things over to Nancy Lay, who is CDW's Head of Corporate Strategy and Innovation, and she'll be moderating our panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joey. We have a great group of panelists with us today, and I'd like to start by asking them to introduce themselves. Perhaps you can tell us first who you are, what you do, and then what one word you would use, excuse me, to describe the state of Chicago's VC industry today. And let's perhaps maybe start with the order of you showing up on my Zoom. So maybe you first go with Tessa, and then to Jason, and then to Joe.
Hey everyone, I'm Tessa Flippin. I'm the founder and managing partner of Capitalize VC, a new firm based here in Chicago. And one word that I would use to describe the Chicago VC industry today, I think is kind of an analogy. And I would say that the VC industry is currently in spring.
How you doing? Jason Mercer. I'm a principal at Cleveland Avenue, focused on due diligence and deal sourcing for our Cast Us Fund, which is a $70 million fund focused on Black, Hispanic, Latinx, and women entrepreneurs. The one word I'd use for this information, encouraging. I'm encouraged.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Aguilar. I'm the acting chief investment officer for the Office of the Illinois State Treasurer. What we do is we have a portfolio of roughly $50 billion that we manage across 7 different investment portfolios on behalf of constituents for the state of Illinois, as well as local municipalities. One of the 7 investment portfolios that we administer is our Illinois Growth and Innovation Fund, which is focused on investing in local Illinois venture capital firms with 3 goals in mind: performance, spurring economic development, as well as fostering a more diverse and inclusive venture capital ecosystem. When I think of one word to describe our local venture capital ecosystem, I will go with the term resilient.
That's fascinating. So these are all very, good and optimistic words: spring, encouraging, resilience. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you choose these words? Maybe first, again, with Tessa, then Joe, then Jason, then Joe.
Yeah, so I chose spring because I think for all of us living in Chicago, we all really can identify with that. Spring is kind of like the first moments of hope, the first sprouts of green after a really long and cold winter. And I think that, if I'm being honest, I feel that Chicago has kind of always been second tier when it comes to some of the coastal cities as it relates to VC and entrepreneurship. And so I think now, in the past year, we've really seen a lot of progress in some of the unicorns, kind of brand named unicorns like Cameo and M1 Finance and Project 44. But then we're also seeing firms similar to my own, Capitalized VC, with Fifth Star, Long Jump Fund, Genius Guild here in Chicago. We're seeing new PE firms that are focused in diversity, like Fifth Century Partners. And then we're seeing firms that have always been focused in diversity, like M25 and Chingona, that are, raising or have already announced their second fund. And so I think that really shows that there is hope for the future.
Very well put. And Jason?
Sure, Tessa far more eloquently said what I was going to say. That's why I'm encouraged. I think from a national perspective and Chicago perspective, diversity in the VC space is just behind. And we probably could say that about 17 different industries: law, investment banking, medicine, you name it. So we know the issue of diversity is something that's going to be the case in a lot of spaces. And then when you bring that into venture capital, as Tessa mentioned, I think Chicago has lagged the coastal states for various reasons, but we are moving fast, catching up. So on VC in general, firms are getting funded, companies are getting funded from those firms, and the growth is significant. And I think you can find a lot of reading that shows that that further goes into diversity. I think Chicago has a large Black and Latinx population in terms of educated population also that can do these jobs and do them well. And I think firms are leaning into that. I also say, I think kind of post George Floyd's murder, a lot of folks are really focused on this truly. And I think the efforts of folks like Joe Aguilar with, his fund, they're one of our LPs at Cleveland Avenue and then Cast Us. People are putting their money where their mouth is. And for that reason, although I think it's still small, and I don't want to take this moment and say, hey, we've done this, let's stop. For me, it's thank you, I appreciate it. Let's keep pushing. I hope the LPs are still pushing. So I'm encouraged that the folks that have decision-making power are going to continue to push. And we'll see this trend for the next 10 or 15 years because it's going to take a long time to really make a dent in, these type of issues.
I would just add on to what Tessa and Jason said. They said it perfectly, and I won't repeat a lot of the same themes that they talked about, but when I talk about resiliency and being resilient overall for the Chicago VC ecosystem, it gets to the same points that Tessa brought up, new funds, it gets to the points that Jason brought up with pushing forward in regards to diversity, but it really also comes with the fact that there are so many biases that are out there about the Midwest and specifically about investing in Chicago, which some investors won't even touch Chicago or won't even examine any potential opportunities locally here. And I think that our VCs, our local shops here, and people who have been investing in our ecosystem have really stepped up and have proven that hypothesis wrong. They've been able to showcase that you can build a company here, you can create a unicorn, and you can be successful. You don't have to be in the coast, and you don't have to be in New York or even Austin, Miami at this point, but you can do that right in our own backyard here in Chicago. So that's really what the thesis behind that word resilient meant for me.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's very much the case, and especially with the support and great work of organizations like Chicago Blend, doing a lot of the research and helping bring the community together. So we just heard the latest findings from Chicago Blend's VC diversity survey. So as you were listening, was there anything in the 2021 numbers that you found surprising?
I'm happy to kick it off. I think overall, the data that Chicago Blend collected was phenomenal. What I found surprising was the comparison versus the national average. And we've seen improvement in terms of the number of diverse individuals in leadership and entry-level roles, I think, with our local firms. But I think to Joey's point during the presentation, the numbers presented don't truly reflect any semblance of balance when we look at the population here in Chicago, but even across the nation. When we think of Chicago VC, I think of innovation, trailblazers, and truly being ahead of our peers on the coasts when it comes to inclusivity. I think that's one of the many strengths that we have here in Chicago versus, say, the Bay Area. So one roadblock that I think it's apparent, especially when you look at the coastal firms and trying to close that diversity gap, is that extreme geographic concentration for where a lot of these tech companies are, which limits the ability for, say, Bay Area, New York, to connect, recruit, retain some of the talent from a widely dispersed pool. For us here in Chicago, we have a hotbed of talent from traditionally underrepresented communities that live here that are highly qualified in our university system. Overall, the numbers not only across Chicago, but within the VC community in general, they need to continue to show improvement. And I think we need to give recognition to the progress that our local firms are making, because there have been significant steps and really incredible momentum that has been moving forward over the past few years. But there is still a long way to go. And to Jason's point, this is something that is going to happen over the long term. It's not going to happen overnight. So we need to continue to push the ball forward and not stop the momentum right here.
Yeah, I'll jump in from there. First, again, thank you for putting together this information. I'm a strong believer in you can't change what you can't track or measure, so thank you. What exactly say surprising? Just because I think, again, in the climate that we're in the United States, people are focusing on this. I really hope that this isn't a new hot thing. I say I hope it's more of a movement, not a moment, but at the very least, it's a moment now. So I do expect numbers from 2021 to be better than 2020, which again, is positive. So I turn this to another way of thinking. I really hope, whether it's within Chicago firms and across the country, people are really putting goals to this. So if we see that, things went from essentially looked across the board, kind of making it up, but looked like it went from, total between Black and Latinx and Hispanic, around, 5% to 7%. I want to see more firms saying we have a 2025 goal of 12%, getting 13%, with the target to be in the next 15 to 20 years, hitting national averages, which it should be around 25%. Black and brown are about 25% of the country, maybe a little bit higher, depending on how you look at it. But what are those long-term goals? So kind of taking your question a different angle, not very surprised and still encouraged, but really hope there are firms and people making long-term goals that can be tracked. So if you're here today, where are you 2 years from now? Where do you want to be 10 years from now?
And I would kind of echo what Jason said, not necessarily surprised, but I wanted to talk about something that actually made me happy about the data. As a first-time fund manager, I was really drawn to that section of the presentation. And I felt that, seeing that Black and Latinx first-time fund employees are leading year-over-year growth really makes me happy to see, because I think it shows that it's very, very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks. But I think that this data kind of shows that that change really starts within the VC industry with first-time fund managers, because they are kind of tackling these issues as they're building their firms and their investment theses. And so it's a really great place to look for change to occur.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts around the numbers. Now, maybe let's give the chance to the audience to learn a little bit more about you. So before you tell us what you're working on right now, can you tell us a little bit more about what brought you to this point? So how did you get here? What sorts of challenges or opportunities were you confronted with on your journey into venture capital?
I'll go first on that one. A little bit about myself. As a career, kind of done a little bit of everything. Started off in investment banking right out of undergrad, did kind of finance with the music industry, got an MBA, came back, did consulting, did not like that at all, then kind of corporate strategy. And all to say that built kind of a master of jack of all trades, master of none kind of capabilities. And that was my biggest issue getting into kind of direct investing, PE or VC. A lot of folks speak of, we want someone with experience. It's kind of like you can't get in the game unless you got that first shot at the game. And we see so much from a racial and gendered perspective of the same type of folks getting that first crack at the game. So for me, joining Cleveland Avenue was just a great blessing because I jokingly say I was cast as first investment. The firm, saw that I had a passion for what we're doing, that I had a background that did lend me to have the capabilities to do what we're doing. And really said, hey, we're going to take a shot at you. I did not have direct investing experience, brought me in. And over the last 2 years, it's been an amazing opportunity to establish the fund. Again, work with great LPs like Joe, who kind of vetted me and probably had questions like, hey, why is this first time guy being some of the face of the fund? But it's worked out. So I'd say for me, it's just keep taking, shots at it, working your network, which again, makes it difficult. And I hope that other firms look at qualified folks for that first opportunity to get in direct investing. And what makes qualifications, I think that is something to think about and pull back. It's not always just the direct investment banking experience or firm experience from another firm, because again, you need that first opportunity.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I'm going to speak for Jason here. He is being extremely modest in his background, his experience. He's just an absolute phenomenal individual, but he brought up a fantastic point when it comes to looking at that non-traditional background. You may not have some of those skill sets that check all the boxes that many require, but it's looking in those potential opportunities. For us and at the State Treasurer's Office, and we launched our Eleanor Growth and Innovation Fund back in 2016, and we had an investment thesis circled around really 3 collinear goals around performance, economic development, but then fostering that more diverse and inclusive venture capital ecosystem locally here. Now, the objective around diversity and inclusion, it was our core belief that a more inclusive VC ecosystem means more inclusive decision-making for investors, companies, generating greater ideas and innovation, providing more opportunities for those highly qualified, diverse founders, and it enabled an opportunity for our local managers to find some of these undervalued opportunities, which we know in the long term will offer communities, especially local, whether it be African-American, Latino communities, the opportunity to build generational wealth. You know, if you look across the world, even locally here, minority populations continue to be largely excluded from the economic mainstream. You know, challenge-wise, many, and I'll take it from the investor standpoint, many investors, especially institutional investors and outside stakeholders in the industry, have continued to operate under the traditional institutional norms and status quo, focusing on short horizon, uncontroversial opportunities that potentially can expect unspectacular results and miss potentially rewarding long-term opportunities that further impairs some of the gap we are seeing for diverse individuals. So it's getting to Jason's point of some of those artificial hurdles that are put up for some of the institutional investor community, and whether it be track record, AUM, even other metrics that historically have not really been a true indicator of future success. Now, we know the population of consumers for goods and services are becoming more diverse, and that goes the same for the workforce. So if firms are not taking a proactive approach today, then ultimately they're creating a headwind for themselves in the future when it comes to that diversity and inclusion piece.
And then I'll round out the question. So I got into VC by becoming a founder first. So I became a founder right after business school. I worked as the founder of a fintech company for about 3 years. And we had a huge focus in crypto and blockchain. And ultimately, we had a very difficult time fundraising, which is ultimately what made me pivot into VC. And the background and expertise I had in blockchain at the time, I think, and my experience as a founder was something that was looked upon highly by a local VC firm based here in Chicago called TechNexus. And they ultimately gave me an opportunity to join the team, which is where I was able to really craft my skills in investing. And then from there, decided to launch Capitalize VC and become my own fund manager to be able to focus on, the types of founders that I wanted to invest in, the types of, technologies I wanted to see in the future. And that's kind of morphed itself into what Capitalize VC is today, which is investing in Black and Latinx founders at a very early stage, but also working to diversify our limited partners. So of our $10 million fund, 50% of our LPs are going to be Black or Latinx accredited investors. And we're really looking to do that in order to build wealth on both sides of the table for founders as well as for investors.
Thank you for sharing the journeys that brought you to this point. And so each of you are involved with VC community in many different ways. So Tessa, as you just mentioned, you launched your own fund, Capitalize VC. Jason, you and your team are leading the CAST US initiative at Cleveland Avenue, which serves as a traditional investment firm, but also with differentiators. And Joe, you're seeing all of this from a LP perspective. So despite these different vantage points, each of you is focused on equity and diversity. Can you tell us about how you're approaching your work and what success really looks like for you? Like not only for you, but also for Chicago's VC and startup community as well.
I can jump in.
No, you got it.
All right. So as I just mentioned, we're investing in Black and Latinx founders. And we're also working to bring on a more diverse group of LPs. And so we measure our success kind of in two ways. First is the success of our portfolio, because at the end of the day, we as a VC firm need to generate outsized returns for our LPs. And so the success of our portfolio is extremely important. but then also we're measuring ourselves on, the number of diverse LPs we have, the amount of capital that they commit to the fund, and ultimately the amount of wealth that we're able to build for them. Because I think, having a more diverse group of LPs means that we can build wealth for a more diverse group of people, which is really a huge goal of ours. And I think that, having diversity at all levels in that way, so at the LP investor level, at the fund manager level, as well as at the, founder level, is really what's going to promote change for Chicago and really serve us well and create success here in the city.
I'll take it from there. So for us, I'll speak first on kind of Cleveland Avenue and then Cast Dust. Cleveland Avenue, as a whole of firm, I guess we don't have a direct diversity or gender initiative, but what I do think is so important about this conversation is we are a very diverse team. Our CIO, Chief Investment Officer, is a Caucasian male who's worked with Mr. Thompson, who's one of the most successful Black, I guess, businessmen of our generation, in my opinion. And they're like brothers. So, I mean, there's me on the investment team. Our investment team is widely varied. We need some more women on the team, to be very frank. But from a racial perspective, we kind of, I think, do a pretty good job. And I think that impacts how we invest across all our funds, which is great. With CASA specifically, as I mentioned, we are focused on, well, the way I look at it, kind of flipping a mixture of nepotism and good old fashioned kind of institutional racism on its head. I think for a lot of reasons, when Black and brown founders go and pitch, that understanding relationship kind of works negatively to them. If a person on the investing table does not look like them, don't have a lot of friends that are like them, I think it's harder to see investing in that person being that early stage, especially in that seed, pre-seed, Series A. We don't have a ton of data. I think that's just harder. And I understand it. I don't like it, but I understand it. So I think as more diverse folks are at the investment table, you make more diverse investments. With CASTA specifically, we're saying, if that is how it works kind of everywhere else, we're the opposite. If you're Black, brown, or a woman, that's a checkbox. We're like, that is a good point. Thank you, appreciate it. And now we are looking at the business, still trying to find great businesses with great business plans, strategies, large addressable markets, the typical stuff. And if you're not Black, brown, or women, we're now saying, hey, are you doing things to kind of impact that community? What does your management team look at it? So we are still looking at a full gambit of racial and gender diversity, but we're just kind of adding kind of a bonus point for that Black and brown and women entrepreneur. We also have a second focus on the Chicagoland area. And this is where I say our fund gets to be a little interesting, is obviously we want to do tremendously well from an ROI for ourselves and for our LPs. That is very important. But we're also very much focused on, can we grow jobs in Chicago? Can we help the Chicago diverse startup community continue to grow? And that it means tracking what other funds are coming to these companies. So for some of ours, we are the first money in. We do lead the round. Are we able to bring other people to the table to get those funds to the companies that need it? Do we see kind of a network effect of saying, because we made an investment in A, they know company B, we can also help out with that. So that's a little bit harder to measure, but we do try to measure job growth, additional capital coming in, and then kind of a geographic, are we seeing things in the actual South Side, so they can be both from an awareness standpoint, but from a job growth standpoint, impact the South and West Side. So just to round that out, fund performance will always be very important, but we also are trying to think more about that community level social component to growth. So yeah, I'll stop there, but it's a very difficult thing to kind of think about, but we do want to try to track it to the best of our ability.
There's a lot of dimensions there. And Joe, do you have any other thoughts too?
Yeah, sure. And similar to what Jason said about the team, and if you look at our office, say Treasurer Frericks has done a absolutely phenomenal job when it comes to building a diverse leadership team. And that trickles down into a lot of the initiatives that we have, then a lot of the makeup for our portfolios and our thought process. You're getting different strategies, different perspectives from different backgrounds for every decision you're making, so that diversity and leadership is extremely important. For us, we want to see the companies that our managers invest in on behalf of Illinois evolve and grow so that they can generate attractive returns for decades to come, and understand for us how our VCs are cultivating these inclusive opportunities. So as long-term investors, we're committed to working with companies and fund managers from all different industries, but we too must be nimble and ensure that our dollars are consistently being invested with our goals in the most dynamic opportunities. So performance is always something we're going to look at and we are going to strive for as the number one priority, whether it be for startups, whether it be for mature companies. And our office, how we have strategized around this specifically is we have focused on intentionality and we've embedded diversity, equity, and inclusion into our decision-making process when selecting investments. Intentionality around seeking qualified opportunities to expand the manager pool, especially around diverse fund managers, to grow that diverse talent base locally here. Now, why are we doing that? I mean, we know that diverse-led firms typically provide more opportunity for access to capital around high potential underrepresented founders whose capital needs has really historically gone unmet throughout multiple financing channels. We know it's no secret today that underrepresented founders, and I think this concept has been proving out over time and more recently, but underrepresented founders are one of the best investment opportunities in the United States today. And providing more opportunities and expanding our diverse talent base here, especially in the city of Chicago, will help better position our ecosystem for future success and innovation. Now, how we embed diversity and inclusion into our decision-making process is that we don't throw out the traditional metrics, traditional qualitative, quantitative assessments on managers. We still do that, but then we also supplement that analysis with understanding how the firms are integrating diversity and inclusion into their process of selecting investments, of hiring practices for their own firm, but then also understanding how they're doing this for their portfolio companies, how they're thinking about policies overall, how they're thinking about board seats, and how they're cultivating that next generation of leaders at their own organization to go from either intern to associate to principal and get up to a partner position. We're making that assessment and we're evaluating those pieces on a qualitative and quantitative basis for all managers that we're making an investment in. When we talk about success for our local community, it is the fact that, at least for how I see success is us being a leader in this space. Because if Chicago is a leader, then this is going to enable higher returns, larger exits, and it's going to bring more capital to our highly qualified companies here in Chicago.
Thanks,
I can add one thing. Joe, you mentioned one thing, and think about Tessa. One thing I think is important too is kind of the ecosystem question, the thought part of this, and like what that means on the spectrum. So one thing I see that Chicago needs, and we hope to kind of help to create, is like that early stage funding, whether it's from a fund or more importantly for me, for the business themselves. If I look at CastUs, we're early, but like later early, seed and kind of Series A, and we could talk about what that means, but folks who are able to write with our big, essentially angel checks, that 25K, 50K, 75K check, I think those dollars going to diverse founders and building that ecosystem of early stage, very early stage funders that go to early stage companies that can grow into something else is very important. I think that's something we're seeing of late. And again, that's not something we track as CastUs, but it's something we're very cognizant of saying, hey, if there are companies that we're seeing that are too early for us, how do we identify firms that also focus on diversity and have a like-minded goal that are writing those earlier stage checks, which, to be honest, it may, again, depending on how you look at it, are mathematically a little bit more risky, but that is their name of the game, or if it's not our name of the game. So that full ecosystem from company to its very early stage to a little bit later stage to some big boys that you do now get to more PE and kind of other things. We want to develop that.
Yeah, and Jason, I would just say that that's a huge focus of what Capitalize is looking to do. I think that like one of the things that we measure success on is, how many first-time LPs do we get in the door that are diverse, because that's kind of their first touch point to VC. And the more that we can introduce them to these concepts around, investing for equity, like long-term investing, how VC actually works, and kind of like pulling back the curtain and trying to provide some insight into what's going on behind the scenes. I think is really going to help educate this like more diverse group of angel investors to come into the space and start doing it on their own and be some of those early friends and family checks. So I agree.
And I would just add a point that's, you know, Tessa, Jason brought up fantastic observations there. When you talk about kind of going throughout that capital stack and the need for that earlier stage capital prior pre-seed, that's still a necessary channel that a lot of entrepreneurs don't have access to. So it's providing those opportunities, but in addition to that, it's ensuring that there's a support system in place that will help them get to that point A to the next stage, to the next round. Because ultimately, starting a company, these are high risk endeavors. And a lot of individuals don't feel comfortable taking that risk because the support system is not in place, or they're just not familiar with what resources are available. As we continue to build that out, especially locally here, it's going to provide more opportunities earlier, but then also for the well-established firms, Series A and later, there'll be more opportunities in your own backyard and more deal flow that is high quality to evaluate as well. So it really comes full circle when it comes to some of the financing channels earlier on in the developmental stage of the process.
Well, this is such a great conversation. And I love the idea of intentionality of the things that we kind of can do to promote more diversity and inclusion for the VC community. So thank you so much for the approaches and the ways to kind of think about how to advance this. I suspect many of the folks in our audience, this is very near and dear to their hearts as well. So thank you again for sharing your perspectives. Maybe I could turn it now to Joey for any Q&A and other remarks before the end of the webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you to all of our panelists for a great conversation. Please stick around. We'll try to get to a couple questions in the few minutes we have. There were a couple questions in both the chat and the Q&A, and some of you already touched on this, but really around, you know, getting into venture, removing barriers for aspiring investors, and also another question about, you know, what are the role of schools, the education system in exposing young people to careers in ventures? You don't all have to answer, but if one of you or two of you maybe want to tackle that, I think some of the folks on the line would love to hear your thoughts.
I guess I'll go. So just make sure I understand the question. The question is like kind of entry points. Am I understand that right?
Yeah, getting into venture and maybe what schools and universities can do to help facilitate that.
I'd say the first thing is really understanding that as a student, and this is where it gets tough, if you could afford it, interning is incredible. Whether it's at the undergrad or the graduate school level, if you are, and I think this is where the coast, I think, does have us, I won't say beat, but we have to work on it. If your school has an internship program that can help facilitate connections to different firms, people like free work, especially from folks that are very passionate and want to work hard. So as much as hard to do, if you're able to find hours to work for free early on, I think that is a huge point of benefit. I think other than that, the traditional routes, they work for a reason. So if you really wanted to get into direct investing, getting some investment banking experience, or trying to, obviously, it's not, you know, just go get a job, but, you know, getting investment banking experience, either, you know, corporate strategy, deal-based experience within corporates, consulting experience. I mean, they work for a reason. So I think looking at those careers as a lily pad or a pipeline to them is something to think about. It just takes time, and that goes back to intentionality. That might turn into a 3, 4 year, 5 year journey, but it's something that, you know, a lot of professionals in these spaces have gone through. So you know that is one pathway. I think going to events and joining organizations like HBC, VC, you know, the Black venture community, Black VC, which is actually an organization, that community is doing a lot to kind of provide opportunities and access. So there's balance. There's a few organizations, websites, things that help you with that. But I think more than anything, trying to get connected directly, whether it's through your school or various intern programs, or just direct reaching out, email, going to events, is what you got to do, because it is a tough place to break into if you don't know where to start.
I would just add on, Jason has fantastic resources when it comes to kind of that entry point. Latinx VC is another one that is a phenomenal organization to help out when it comes with, kind of getting that foot in the door and getting some of that experience with the local firms, because that experience goes a long way. I'm going to take the question in a very similar form, but also kind of tweak it a little bit to talk about what GPs can do and understand, the concept behind this. Internships, I'm a massive supporter of them. And this is something that is phenomenal and is necessary. However, only having an internship program, that's not enough. What you need to understand is when somebody comes into an organization as an intern, they're going to look up at leadership. They're going to look up at the mid-level and understand, what is my pathway? How exactly can I get there? It's going to take hard work. That's going to be the first and one of the most important things to do. But if they look up in leadership and the rest of their staff is not diverse, they're not going to feel inclusive. This gets the problem of the ones and the onlys in this one. They're going to say, how can I have an opportunity to move up in this organization where there's nobody else who looks like me, who has a background like me, that has moved up? Of course, hard work is going to be the reason why they are promoted, but understand that inclusivity is a part of diversity as well. And that's the second form of it. So you need to ensure that you are creating a safe environment and an inclusive environment to ultimately bring out the innovation, the ideas, the perspectives from your staff, especially from the interns that have that different background to help inform your opinion. So internships, I love them, massive supporters of them, but there can be initiatives, policies, programs built out on top of those to be very successful.
I know we're going over time now, so I just wanted to say a big thanks to all of our panelists for that great conversation. We have additional resources at chicagoblend.org, so definitely feel free to check us out there. I also just wanted to thank our advisory board, as well as our board of directors, especially our founder and board president, Lindsay Knight. I also want to thank our generous sponsors, our dedicated volunteers, and all of you for spending some time with us this morning. In the coming weeks and months, we'll be announcing a number of things, including some new programs, launching some new offerings, and kicking off our annual Startup Diversity Survey. So if you're interested in learning more, I would encourage you to reach out to me, or you can visit chicagoblend.org for additional information. Again, thank you to our wonderful panelists. I hope you found this information useful and insightful. Check out our website if you want to dig a little deeper, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you, Joey.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Joey, take care.